In one of the dailies over the weekend, over 2,000 plus children drop out from primary, secondary school. According to the news article, at least 151 primary school pupils dropped out of government schools in Trinidad between the beginning of 2020 and the end of 2022, while another 2,663 students dropped out of government secondary schools during the same period, a figure of 2,814. And according to the article, many of the students felt as though they had no choice but to drop out. Speaking on the issue, Tabakit MP and Shadow Minister of Education, Ms. Anita Haynes, said that the Ministry of Education's revelation that approximately 2,800 plus students dropped out of primary and secondary schools across Trinidad and Tobago between 2020 and 2022 is proof that the ministry has failed vulnerable students. Joining us is Ms. Haynes. A pleasant good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, Mikee, and good evening to all of your viewers.
It's a pleasure having you. You saying
Thank
that
you very much.
This could have been avoided?
Absolutely. Listen, for when we first faced the COVID-19 problem within the school, which was the movement from physical to online, we started to get very startling numbers with 76,000 plus students, no access to devices. Then you had students who never logged on, which was 46,000. And you get these high numbers. And I remember from as far back as 2020 asking the ministry, well, what are you doing about it? What they did was go on a drive to hide the data from the public. And I make no apologies for saying this because we've asked these questions in Parliament. And there's always some waffling, some, dancing, bobbing and weaving around the issue. And now you had to get a Freedom of Information application in order to use legal means to just get the information out of the ministry. And I think what is important is that this is still an approximation based on the data the ministry has collected. And I want to point out here that across ministries, with my specific focus being the Ministry of Education and how they work with the Ministry of Social Services or Social Welfare, that they have been unable to collect data and use it amongst the ministries to get a full picture. So the scary thing about this is that we have now some numbers, but we may not have accurate figures because these are some approximate figures. So the situation may in fact be worse than what we are seeing right now.
Yeah, we're talking about an issue here based on human index. I mean, these are our future assets, and one definitely doesn't want to play any political football with this issue. This is the future of our country. One would think that there would have been more transformative sort of programs, understanding that a lot of these families were hit hard economically.
Correct.
One part of the story said a 13-year-old dropped out of school at the age of 10, and the reason for dropping out was that they had other siblings and the mother was a single parent. So they had to help out by taking care of younger brothers and sisters. I mean, couldn't there have been some programs that could have been put in place to sort of deal with this whole economic transformation?
Absolutely. In my first budget contribution in the House of Representatives, that would have been 2020, I said that we have gotten into a space of significant regression where now, in the old days, you would hear about parents choosing which child could make it out, choosing which child to send to school. That is where we are now in 2023. When I raised the issue of the high cost of back to school, again, it was met with arrogance. It was met with scorn, where you say, well, first of all, you don't want online school and you don't want physical school. That was never the issue. It was saying that you have to take into consideration where we are at as a society. The fact remains that based on the lockdown measures during the COVID-19 pandemic, several thousands of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are still unable to recover from income loss, job loss. Some companies have shut down completely. And that is where we are. And they are parents and they have to send their children to school. When you couple that with fuel hikes, when you couple that with the rising cost of transportation And then you add into that a failure by the ministry to provide public transportation or school transportation for students to get to and from school. The physical act of getting to school becomes out of reach. When we said relax the uniform measures, Tobago did it, the THA saw the value in saying what is most important is that you get into school. Trinidad, we gave the parents no such comfort. So if you relax the uniform measures, those who can't afford the sneaker, who can't afford the cloth or the school shirt, they could still get their children to school. But when you add up these costs, the rising cost of food, the rising cost of living in general, these numbers will not be as shocking as they are because people are not able to send their children to school. And the article, for anyone who is living in Trinidad and Tobago, who is engaged with communities, are not shocked by what they're saying. And I think the silence by the ministry is very telling.
But in the midst of all of this, it seems as though the narrative is all about the statistics as far as the data and what have you. While that is taking place, we have young people that are falling through the cracks. And if it is that the ministry has in their possession the data of so many children and the figures are going up, for example, a closer look, the education district with the most government primary school dropouts since 2020 was Port of Spain and environs with 49. And the district with the most secondary school dropouts was St. George East, with 724 students in 2021 alone. That's 302 students dropped out of secondary schools in the district in St. George East. I mean, the figures are there. Are they not stepping back, making assessments and seeing what programs they could implement to help?
Apparently not. Apparently not. And these are active dropouts, right? As opposed to passive dropouts, where you have high absenteeism, where you have persons who may come in and leave. There are a number of issues facing our school system. And again, what do you hear coming from the ministry? The same deafening silence that we're getting right now. I have advocated time and time again, let us increase the school support services. Clearly, students are in need of it. Clearly, let us look very closely at the impact that school transportation is having. Because if you know who is accessing school transport, who's getting to and from school, if you know from social services, the Ministry of Social Services, that you know which families are in need, you can create a plan for targeted intervention. It saves on any perceived wastage by the government. It creates a scenario where you are in fact using things that are available and getting it to the people who are most in need. What we have are big talk, big policy ideas at the top that do not filter down to the actual people who are in need. And that is what we're facing. And we continue to see the problem, you know. Last year, we had a conversation on examination results at the SBA level as well as the CSEC level. And I said it then, I said if you do not make targeted, data-driven measures that you are measuring over time, monitoring and evaluating to see if it is working, then you are going to be doing things, spending money and adding no value to the lives of people. And that is what keeps happening, and that is why we are seeing these numbers today.
Now these numbers, these figures represent individuals. They represent students. I mean, these are just numbers, not just to be bandied about. Now, having these numbers, has the ministry followed up to find out, listen, can we get to some of these children? Perhaps they were homeschooled. Perhaps they've taken an alternative learning route. I mean, has there been anything to visit these homes with social workers and find out, listen, we have the figures, we have the numbers, but it also represents young, bright minds that may need to have some sort of guidance and assistance. Have they followed up on any of this?
They have done nothing of the sort. As a matter of fact, one of the only solutions they've put forward in terms of students who are out of the academic system is an increase in the technical vocational spaces, right? Textbooks. Here's the issue. They have not been training and certifying teachers in the textbook space. So you made a promise and you have no means of implementing it. And so those are the things that as the Parliament resumes post-Easter, we would be hashing out because, like you said, these are real people. These are real families. We all know that education is a passport for any kind of economic mobility. And so if you want to better your circumstance, you always will get an education. These are families that are really in dire straits and certainly in need of targeted interventions and help.
And I agree with you, and it cannot be just business as usual to say, listen,
Okay,
and I hate this term falling through the cracks, when in fact that when you look at what's taking place with so many different platforms that are available for learning, and one would think that our priority would be having our young students prepared to be globally competitive, to go out there and carve out a niche. It's not a matter of just simply labeling them as falling through the cracks. Where does the ministry or the stakeholders believe that these young students end up when in fact that they have no options but to go out there and make a living?
And that's the thing. I mean, you are under the law of Trinidad and Tobago supposed to access education until you're 16 years of age, right? And if we can read stories about 10-year-olds who have to stay at home to take care of the family, we've had stories of 14-year-olds who have to work to bring in an income. Trinidad and Tobago is in a very scary place. These are not, and as you rightfully said, it's not about politics. It certainly could never be about political points. It is about the next generation of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. And if indeed the government continues to fail these children, then we are really going to be in a much scarier situation 5 or 10 years down the road.
Now, the fact that there's no follow-up means that then there's no assessment, psychological assessment, as to how these students may feel. A sense of hopelessness, a sense of, listen, I just can't compete with my peers. I have to throw in the towel because I am being deprived of a normal situation where my friends and everyone is involved, but my parents just can't afford to send me to school. I mean, has that been taken in consideration exactly what kind of mindset these young people are going to be in?
No, I told you, even when we discuss mental health, help for students, and in fact teachers within the school system, they've all been dismissed. You can see, like I said, from the information coming from the ministry where their minds are at. Because you can't tell me you're talking about a digital classroom and launching your platforms and whatnot, and then you don't know if students are coming in to access it or even able to access it. Or you don't know that these students aren't even in school anymore. So you see, on one hand, you make these announcements and you try to create an illusion that things are working well. And the reality is, children are not even able to attend because they have to stay at home to support their families, to support a household. And that means we are failing, the government is failing in the delivery of the social contract. There are certain things our government is supposed to be held accountable for. Our national security is one, our education is one, and infrastructure. And if you look at all of these things, you are seeing with your eyes, you can feel it, you can feel the failure. It is very tangible now. It is no longer theoretical.
Yeah, and as you said, as citizens, we must continue to push the government to uphold the end of the social contract, lest we suffer the consequences. Now, there are some other issues, such as bullying. We've seen school fighting, and this has been shared viral based on what's been happening in these schools. How did it get to this point?
And these are all interconnected issues. When we can discuss what happens when you are unable to keep up, what happens if from 2019, the end of 2020 till 2022, you weren't able to access online school. You're come back into physical school with no intervention for the students who were physically unable to access online school. So you are, in essence, behind the rest of your class. Of course, this triggers new measures of bullying. Of course, it will trigger school violence because you have students who are unable to cope. When we tell you increase student support services, look at the mental health of students, look at the curriculum, and talk about things like mediation and problem solving, and let us utilize what we have, create from what we already have, cases for students to process what has happened and then go forward. And all of these suggestions are ignored, and instead you create a task force, an interministerial task force to look at school violence. And in the year since that task force has existed, school violence has escalated to now we need TTPS and the defense force in schools to stop it. I mean, again, the evidence is tangible. It is no longer theoretical. All of these issues are interconnected. So our failure in one end leads to our failure across the board. And the two ministers of education seem unable to cope with what they are supposed to do, unable to deliver on the mandate that they have towards these children and teachers and people within the education sector.
Now, the Ministry of Education is saying that there is a support system. Is this the best kept secret? How many people are aware of the system, and exactly how is the process to access this system done?
And if you have a system, and in the time that the system has existed, you have seen the problem escalate, wouldn't it make the most sense to then take a look at the system and make sure that the system is working for its intended purpose? Because if you are seeing what I'm seeing, then you know the system isn't working. So whether or not the system exists is irrelevant. If you are insisting it exists, then you must. Logic must lead you to that it is not working for its intended purpose, and then tell us what you intend to do about it. Don't tell us it exists. Tell us how you intend to fix it to make it work. And that is the only conversation we should be willing to have.
And I agree with you on that. And I'm certain that people who are watching this program right now are really and truly, they're quite bothered at the fact that there's such a high rate of young people who, according to them, are falling through the cracks, who are no longer in the school system. And if you have these figures and you have this data, then you must be somehow have a system that raises a red flag, that tell you indicators as based on the period, based on the geographical location. Having all of this, should there not be a better support system that moves in immediately as the bell goes off?
Absolutely. And you know, this is, again, you have to disaggregate the problem in order to find proper solutions. Is it that of these 2,800 students that you found in some instances who've dropped out of school, if the situation is economic, if the situation is that if they had adequate access to school transportation, they would be able to get back into the school system. I mean, I've raised this on several occasions. Students in my constituency, some families are paying because of fuel hike and infrastructural neglect, so the terrible state of the road. I had two schools closed down completely because the road collapsed towards that leads towards the school. Families from areas like Cotton Hill spend upwards of $70 one way to get to schools because taxis are unable to get in and out of their communities. These are real issues, and so if you know what the issue is, then you can have a solution. But if you treat it as a blanket, so the issues facing the students in Port of Spain will not be the same issues facing students in rural communities. And therefore, you have to come as a responsible Ministry of Education and this school district by school district, tell us, itemize what are the problems that are preventing our students from accessing education, and then what are the targeted solutions. Don't come 1 week from now and tell us about an interministerial committee or our task force that is going to study our problems for a year. Meanwhile, 2,000 more students drop out of the system, and we have no solution, just rhetoric and old talk, and no help for these families. And that is the situation we're facing right now.
Yeah. Closing comments, go right ahead.
I just want to say that as we continue to push at the parliamentary level, as we continue to utilize the Joint Select Committees, utilize our media forum, it is very important that our citizens pay very close attention. There are serious problems facing Trinidad and Tobago, but the solutions exist. They are within our reach. What you need is political will to get things done for the citizens of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And once we start moving in that direction, you will start to see these problems being solved.
Thank you so much, Ms. Haynes. It's been a pleasure. All the best of luck to you and your entire team. This is quite disturbing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.